My name is Marcus Holloway, and I'm not sure where to begin with all this mess, but I guess it starts with what I thought was a solid life. For 15 years, I'd been married to Clarissa, a woman I once believed understood me down to my bones. We lived in a nice suburban house with clean lines and big windows, nothing fancy, but it felt like ours. No kids, just the two of us, and I was fine with that. I'd spent years pouring myself into my work, starting with a tiny company that barely paid the bills. Over time, I grew it into something real, a multi-million-dollar business that let us breathe easy. Investments, smart moves, long nights, it all added up. Then there was the family estate, this old house my parents handed down to me when they retired. It sat on 7 acres of rolling green land, the kind of place that smells like history when you walk through it. I'd fixed it up, not because it was worth a fortune, though it was close to $7 million, but because it meant something. It was where I'd grown up, where my dad taught me to fish in the creek out back, where my mom used to hum while she cooked Sunday dinners. Restoring it felt like honoring them, keeping a piece of us alive. Clarissa knew that. At least, I thought she did. But then one evening, everything shifted. We were sitting in the living room, the TV humming low in the background, when she put her glass of wine down hard enough to make me look up. She crossed her arms, her lips tight, and stared at me like I'd done something wrong. "Hand over the inheritance, Marcus," she said, her voice sharp like a knife cutting through the quiet. "It's ours now." I blinked at her, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. She wasn't asking, she was telling me. My chest tightened, and I set my own drink down slow, trying to figure out what she meant by ours. The estate wasn't some pile of cash I'd been hiding. It was a home, a promise, a tie to my parents who were still alive and, well, living there. I'd never seen her look at me like that before, like I was a lock she needed to break open. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my tone even, hoping she'd back off. She didn't. "You've been sitting on that property long enough," she said, leaning forward. "It's time to cash it in. We could do so much with that money." Her eyes were bright, but not with love, with something else, something hungry. I told her no, flat out. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about family, about roots. She didn't get it, or maybe she didn't want to. That night, she went to bed without another word, but I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she'd been thinking this way. The next day, she acted like nothing happened, smiling over coffee, but I could feel it, the first crack in something I'd thought was unbreakable. I kept going over her words in my head, trying to make sense of them. Hand it over? Like it was hers to claim? I built everything we had, and yeah, she'd been there, but this wasn't her legacy, it was mine. My parents, Nolan and Marjorie, weren't just names on a deed. They were the heartbeat of that house. I couldn't imagine telling them we were selling it out from under them because Clarissa wanted a bigger bank account. I tried talking to her again a few days later, thinking maybe she'd calm down. "It's not just a house," I said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "It's where I come from." She rolled her eyes, like I was being dramatic. "Marcus, it's real estate. Don't make it more than it is." That stung, but I didn't push back, not yet. I figured she'd let it go eventually. She always had before when we disagreed, but this time felt different. She started dropping hints, little jabs about how practical people didn't cling to old things, how we could travel or buy a second home if I just see reason. I'd nod, say something vague, and change the subject, but inside, I was starting to see her in a new light. Not the woman I'd married, but someone who'd been waiting for a chance to cash in on my life. It wasn't loud or obvious at first, just a shift, like the ground moving under my feet. I kept working, kept living, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something. And then, one night, I caught her on the phone, whispering about appraisals and timelines. She hung up quick when she saw me, smiled like it was nothing. "Just a friend," she said. I didn't believe her. That was the moment I knew. Loyalty wasn't what I thought it was, not with her. The crack was real, and it was only going to get bigger. I couldn't stop thinking about that phone call Clarissa made, the one she brushed off like it was nothing. It stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind while I went through my days pretending everything was fine. My name's Marcus Holloway, and I'm the kind of guy who likes to keep things steady, work, home, family, all in balance. But after that night when Clarissa demanded the inheritance, I started watching her closer. She wasn't just hinting anymore. She was pushing, and I could feel the weight of it every time we were in the same room. A few weeks after her first demand, she hit me with it again, this time with no room for misreading. We were eating dinner, steak and potatoes, something simple I'd cooked, and she put her fork down, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Marcus, I'm serious. liquidate the estate, and put the money in our joint account. It's $7 million we're sitting on. I nearly choked on my food. She wasn't guessing the value. She'd done her homework, probably from that whispered phone call. The estate was worth a lot, sure, maybe close to what she said, but it wasn't some stockpile I could cash out. It was my parents' home, their life, and mine too in a way. I set my knife down slow, trying to keep my voice calm. Clarissa, it's not ours to sell. My parents live there. It's theirs, legally and otherwise. Her face tightened, like I'd slapped her with words. They're old, Marcus, she said, leaning back in her chair. They've had their time. We need to think about us now. That hit me hard. My parents, Nolan and Marjorie, weren't just old to me. They were the people who'd raised me, who still called every Sunday to check in. I pictured my dad tinkering in his shed, my mom watering her roses out front, and then I looked at Clarissa, sitting there like they were in the way. They're not going anywhere, I said, my tone sharper than I meant it to be. And neither is the house. She didn't yell back, which surprised me. Instead, she got quiet, picked up her plate, and walked to the sink. But I knew her well enough to see the storm brewing. For the next few days, she barely spoke to me. Dinners were silent, just the clink of forks and the hum of the fridge. When she did talk, it was cold, clipped, like she was punishing me for saying no. One night, she stood in the doorway of my home office, arms crossed. You're selfish, you know that, she said. Keeping all that for yourself when we could have a real life. I looked up from my laptop, papers spread out from a late-night work session. Selfish? I repeated, almost laughing. It's not mine to give, Clarissa. It's theirs. And what's real about kicking my parents out of their home? She shook her head, like I was too stupid to get it, and walked off. That's when I realized this wasn't about the house, not really. It was about control. She didn't care about the memories or the legacy. She saw dollar signs and thought I owed her a cut. I started sleeping worse after that, waking up to every creak in the house, wondering what she'd try next. I'd built our life together, 15 years of it, and now she was acting like it wasn't enough unless I handed over something that wasn't even mine to hand over. I kept going to work, meeting clients, smiling like nothing was wrong, but inside, I was unraveling. I'd catch myself staring out the window at the office, thinking about my parents. My dad's hands, rough from years of fixing things, my mom's laugh when she told stories about me as a kid. Those weren't things you could sell off. Clarissa didn't see that. To her, they were obstacles, not people. One morning, I called my dad just to hear his voice. How's the house? I asked, keeping it casual. Oh, you know, he said, chuckling. Your mom's got me painting the porch again. Says it's peeling. I smiled, picturing them out there, happy. I didn't tell him about Clarissa. Didn't want to worry them. But when I hung up, I felt this ache, like I was failing them by letting her even think about taking it away. That night, she tried again, softer this time. We were on the couch, some movie playing I wasn't watching. Marcus, she said, resting a hand on my arm. I just want us to be secure. The money could set us up forever. I pulled away, stood up, and looked down at her. We're secure, I said. I've made sure of that. This isn't about need, it's about greed. Her face hardened, and she didn't argue back. She just got up and went to bed, leaving me alone with the TV flickering. I knew then that this wasn't going to blow over. She wasn't going to let it go, and I wasn't going to give in. It was an ultimatum, even if she hadn't said the word. Her or them. Our marriage or my family. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it got. I couldn't share my future with someone who'd tossed my parents aside like trash. I sat there in the dark, the movie credits rolling, and felt the ground shift again. This wasn't just a fight. It was the beginning of the end. I'm Marcus Holloway, and I've always been the kind of guy who tries to keep things together, even when they're falling apart. But when I got that message from Clarissa while I was halfway across the world, it was like someone pulled the rug out from under me. I'd flown to Tokyo for a 10-day business trip, big meetings, contracts that could push my company to the next level. It was a chance to lock in some deals I'd been chasing for months, and I'd left home thinking everything was under control. Clarissa and I weren't exactly on great terms after our fights about the estate, but she'd been quiet lately, almost too quiet. Before I left, I'd scribbled a note for her, stuck it on the fridge, heading out. Parents might stop by. See you in 10 days. I figured she'd sulk a bit, maybe give me the silent treatment when I got back, but we'd work it out. That's how it always went. Or so I thought. The first few days in Tokyo were a blur, jet lag, endless handshakes, late-night dinners with clients who liked to talk more than sign. I was in the middle of a meeting, sitting across from a guy in a sharp suit, when my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it, expecting maybe a quick "miss you" from Clarissa or a work update. Instead, it was her name, in one sentence staring back at me. "I demolished your parents' house. They'll live in a home now." No capitals, no punctuation, just those words, cold and flat. I read it twice, then a third time, my brain refusing to catch up. The guy across from me was still talking, something about shipping timelines, but his voice faded into static. I held up a hand, muttered an apology, and stepped out into the hall. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. Demolished? My parents' house? The estate I'd fought her over? I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted back, "What the hell are you talking about?" No reply. I stood there, leaning against the wall of some fancy Tokyo office building, my tattoo tied around my neck, feeling like I couldn't breathe. My parents, Nolan and Marjorie, where were they? Were they okay? I called my dad next, my fingers fumbling over the numbers. It rang 4 times before he picked up, his voice steady but tired. "Marcus? You all right, son?" he asked. "Dad, what's going on?" I said, trying not to sound as panicked as I felt. "Clarissa just sent me something about the house." He sighed, long and heavy. "She did it, Marcus. Brought in some guys with machines yesterday. It's gone. We're at Peter's place now. Your cousin's been good to us." I couldn't speak for a second, just listened to the hum of the line between us. "Are you okay?" I finally managed. "We're fine," he said. "Shocked, but fine. Your mom's holding up. We didn't see it coming." I told him I'd call back soon and hung up, my head spinning. Clarissa had actually done it. She'd torn down the house, the one she'd been after, the one I'd told her wasn't ours to touch. I went back into the meeting, sat down, and nodded through the rest of it, but I wasn't there. My mind was back home, picturing the rubble where my childhood used to be. I kept seeing my mom's rose bushes crushed, my dad's shed flattened, all because Clarissa decided she could take what she wanted. That night, alone in my hotel room, I stared out at the city lights and tried to make sense of it. I'd left her a note about my parents stopping by. Had she waited until I was gone on purpose? The timing was too perfect. I pulled up her message again, read it over, and then, out of nowhere, I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but a sharp, bitter one that echoed off the walls. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd gotten her $7 million prize. "Oh, Clarissa," I thought, shaking my head. "You have no idea what you've done." I didn't know everything yet, how she'd pulled it off, what she'd planned next, but I knew one thing. She'd miscalculated. That house wasn't just a paycheck waiting to happen, and I wasn't the pushover she thought I was. I couldn't fly back yet. The deals here were too big, and I had to see them through. But I spent every free minute on the phone with my parents, piecing it together. They'd woken up to noise, bulldozers, men shouting, and Clarissa standing there, arms crossed, telling them it was for the best. My mom had cried, my dad said, but they'd grabbed what they could and left before it got worse. I asked if they'd called the police. "Didn't think to," Dad admitted. "It happened so fast." I told them to sit tight, that I'd handle it when I got back. Inside, I was boiling, angry at her, angry at myself for not seeing this coming. But that laugh kept bubbling up too, because Clarissa didn't know the half of it. She'd swung hard, thinking she'd hit a home run, but she'd missed the ball completely. I finished the trip, signed the contracts, and booked the earliest flight home. Whatever she thought she'd gained, I was going to make sure she lost more. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I'm Marcus Holloway, and I've always been a guy who likes to know the ground I'm standing on, solid, predictable, something I can trust. But when I got Clarissa's message about demolishing my parents' house, I felt that ground shake, and not just because she'd done something insane. See, here's the thing she didn't know, the twist that made her whole plan a house of cards. The estate she thought she'd turned into cash wasn't mine to begin with. I was still in Tokyo when I started digging into what she'd done, piecing it together between meetings and sleepless nights. My parents, Nolan and Marjorie, had told me the basics: bulldozers, Clarissa barking orders, them scrambling to grab their stuff. But as I sat in that hotel room, staring at the neon glow outside, I realized she'd stepped into a mess she couldn't even see. The house, that big old place on 7 acres, wasn't part of some inheritance I'd tucked away. It legally belonged to my parents through a family trust they'd set up years ago, before I even married Clarissa. My name wasn't on the deed, not yet, anyway. I'd restored it, sure, Put my own money into fixing the roof and painting the walls, but that didn't make it mine. It was theirs, locked tight in a trust she couldn't touch. And the land? That was the real kicker. It was zoned historical, tied up in county preservation rules so strict you couldn't cut down a tree without a stack of permits, let alone knock down a house that had been standing since my great-grandparents' time. I told her it was special, but she must have thought I meant sentimental, not untouchable. I leaned back in the hotel chair, running my hands through my hair, almost grinning at how wrong she'd gotten it. Clarissa didn't just misjudge me, she misjudged everything. I called my cousin Peter the next day. He's the one my parents were staying with, and asked him to fill me in. She showed up with 2 guys and a couple of machines, he said, his voice low like he still couldn't believe it. Neighbors saw it too. Said she didn't even blink, just stood there watching it come down. I asked if she'd had paperwork, permits, anything legal. Didn't look like it, he said. Those guys weren't exactly pros, sketchy types, you know? One of them even dropped his phone in the mess and took off swearing. That's when it clicked. She hadn't gone through a real company, hadn't hired anyone who'd ask questions or check rules. She'd probably found some cheap labor on an app, guys who'd do anything for cash and not care about the fallout. I thanked Peter, told him to keep an eye on my parents, and hung up. Then I did some digging of my own. A quick search on my laptop pulled up local news, nothing big yet, but a small blurb about an unauthorized demolition on protected land. The county was already sniffing around, and the contractors? Turns out they were under investigation for illegal jobs just like this. Clarissa had picked the worst possible team for her little scheme. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling this mix of anger and relief wash over me. She thought she'd walked away with $7 million in her pocket, but she'd actually handed me a loaded gun. The trust meant she destroyed someone else's property, my parents', not mine. The historical zoning meant she'd broken laws she didn't even know existed. And those shady contractors? They'd sell her out the second the heat came down. I could almost picture her standing in the wreckage, smug and sure she'd won, not realizing she'd lit a match under her own feet. I didn't call her yet, didn't want to tip her off. Instead, I emailed my lawyer, Evelyn Carter, back home. She's sharp, the kind of person who lives for a fight like this. Clarissa demolished my parents' house, I wrote. It's in the trust, zoned historical. She had no right. Start looking into it. I hit send and leaned back, my mind racing. Evelyn would know exactly what to do. Property law, county regs, all of it. I trusted her to start building a case while I wrapped up in Tokyo. For the rest of the trip, I kept my head in the game, smiled at clients, signed the deals, shook hands like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was counting the hours until I could get home and see the damage for myself. Clarissa hadn't just crossed a line. She'd run headfirst into a wall she didn't even know was there. I thought about my parents, stuck at Peter's place, their home reduced to rubble. My mom's voice had been steady when we talked, but I knew her. She'd be hiding the hurt. My dad, too, acting tough like always. They didn't deserve this. And Clarissa? She didn't deserve the life I'd built for us. Not anymore. By the time I boarded the plane back, I wasn't just mad. I was ready. She'd swung hard, thinking she'd knocked me out. But she didn't know the game she was playing. That house wasn't her jackpot. It was her mistake. And I was going to make sure she paid for it. I'm Marcus Holloway, and I've always tried to be the guy who keeps his cool, even when things get rough. But when I landed back home from Tokyo, stepping off that plane into the familiar damp air of the airport, I felt like a storm was brewing inside me. Clarissa had demolished my parents' house, their home, their history, and I'd spent the last few days piecing together how deep her mess went. The trust, the historical zoning, the shady contractors, it was all coming together, and I was ready to hit back. I grabbed my bag and drove straight to my cousin Peter's place, where my parents were staying. The whole way, I kept picturing the estate, that big old house with its creaky floors and wide porch, now just a pile of broken wood and dust. When I pulled up, Peter's house was quiet, a little brick place with a tidy yard. I knocked, and my mom, Marjorie, opened the door. She looked smaller somehow, her gray hair pulled back, but she smiled when she saw me. "Marcus," she said, pulling me into a hug. "You didn't have to rush over." I hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender soap. "Yeah, I did," I said, stepping inside. My dad, Nolan, was in the living room, sitting in an armchair with a cup of coffee. He nodded at me, his face calm but tired. "Good to see you, son," he said. We sat down, and they told me everything, how Clarissa had shown up out of nowhere with those machines, how she told them it was time to move on, how they barely grabbed their clothes and a few photos before it all came down. Mom's voice stayed steady, but her hands twisted together in her lap. Dad just shook his head, like he still couldn't believe it. She didn't even blink, he said. Just watched it happen. I listened, my jaw tight, and when they finished, Mom looked at me and said she thought we'd go quietly. That stuck with me. Clarissa didn't know my parents at all, not their strength, not their pride. After making sure they were okay, Peter had set them up in his guest room. I drove home. Our house felt different when I walked in, colder somehow, even though Clarissa wasn't there. She'd left a note on the counter, out with friends. Back later. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. I didn't care where she was. I had work to do. I called Evelyn Carter, my lawyer, right then. She picked up on the second ring, her voice crisp and ready. Marcus, I got your email, she said. This is a gold mine. She's in deep. I paced the kitchen as we talked, the tile cool under my feet. What VE we got? I asked. Evelyn didn't hold back. Destruction of private property, for starters, she said. The trust means it's your parents' house, not yours or hers. Emotional distress, your folks being forced out like that. Unauthorized demolition on historical land. She didn't have permits, and the county's already investigating. And elder abuse by displacement, since she uprooted them without cause. I stopped pacing, leaning against the counter. Elder abuse? I repeated. Oh yeah, Evelyn said, almost gleeful. Courts hate when people mess with seniors like this. She's looking at civil claims, maybe criminal if the county pushes it. Those contractors? Already on the radar. They'll flip on her in a heartbeat. I could hear her flipping papers, her mind already racing ahead. I'm filing tomorrow, she said. We'll hit her with everything at once. You good with that? I didn't hesitate. Do it, I said. She doesn't get to walk away from this. We hung up, and I stood there, staring out the window at the dark yard. Clarissa had no idea what was coming. She'd swung at my family, thinking she'd come out on top, but she'd handed me a loaded deck. I went to bed that night. Our bed, though it didn't feel like ours anymore, and barely slept, my mind running through it all. The next morning, Evelyn called again. Papers are in, she said. I've got copies of the trust, county zoning docs, witness statements from neighbors. She's served today. I thanked her and hung up, then drove to the estate, or what was left of it. The sight hit me like a punch, splintered beams, crushed brick, a few of Mom's roses sticking out of the dirt like they were fighting to be seen. I walked the edge of the property, my boots crunching on debris, and felt this fire in my chest. Clarissa thought this was her victory, but she'd just started a war. I didn't see her that day. She stayed out, probably celebrating her win, but when she finally came home that night, I was waiting. She walked in, tossing her keys on the table, and froze when she saw the legal envelope Evelyn had sent over. What's this? She asked, her voice tight. Read it, I said, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages, and I watched her face change, confusion, then panic. You're suing me? She said, looking up. You demolished my parents' house, I said, keeping my voice low. You broke laws. You displaced them. Yeah, I'm suing you. She stared at me, like she couldn't believe I'd fight back. Marcus, this is crazy, she said. We can fix this. No, I said, stepping closer. You can't fix what you broke. She didn't say anything after that, just turned and walked out, papers in hand. I let her go. The storm was here, and I had the firepower. She'd learned soon enough what she'd really done. I'm Marcus Holloway, and I've always thought I knew the woman I married. 15 years is a long time to share a life with someone. But after Clarissa demolished my parents' house, I started seeing her in a way I never had before, like a mask had slipped off. I'd come home from Tokyo, faced the wreckage, and set Evelyn, my lawyer, loose with a stack of legal claims. That should have been enough to deal with. But then I found out something else, something that turned my stomach and made me wonder how far she'd really gone. It was a couple days after she got served the lawsuit papers. She'd been dodging me, coming home late or not at all, probably thinking she could wait me out. I was at our house, sorting through bills and trying to keep my head straight, when I decided to check our joint accounts. Just routine, making sure nothing was off. That's when I saw it. A string of small withdrawals, cash mostly, over the past week. Nothing huge, but enough to raise an eyebrow. I figured maybe she was stress spending, buying herself drinks or clothes to feel better about the mess she'd made. But then I got a call from my cousin Peter. Marcus, he said, his voice low. You need to see something. I drove over to his place, where my parents were still staying, and he handed me his phone. Look at this, he said, scrolling to an online marketplace, one of those sites where people sell old furniture or knickknacks. There, listed under a username I didn't recognize at first, were things I knew too well. My mom's wedding dress, faded lace and all, priced at $200 with a caption that said vintage charm. My dad's war medals, the ones he'd earned in Vietnam, tagged as collector's item, $150. Even a stack of handwritten letters from my grandparents, bundled up for $50 like they were junk. I scrolled, my hand shaking, and saw more paintings from the living room, a clock my dad fixed every spring, little pieces of their life scattered across the screen. How'd you find this? I asked Peter, my voice hoarse. Neighbor sent it to me, he said. Recognized the stuff from when he'd visit. Check the seller's profile. It's linked to Clarissa's email. I stared at him, then back at the phone. She'd done this. Before the demolition, she must have gone through the house, picked out what she could sell, and hauled it off. Not just greedy, heartless. I drove home fast, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Clarissa wasn't there, but I didn't care. I started looking. In the garage, I found boxes she hadn't shipped yet, a silver candlestick from my mom's dining table, a quilt she'd sewn by hand. I took pictures of everything, sent them to Evelyn with a quick note. She's selling their stuff too. Then I waited. When Clarissa walked in that night, heels clicking on the floor, I was sitting at the kitchen table, one of the letters, my granddad's shaky handwriting, right in front of me. She stopped, her purse halfway to the counter. What's that? She asked, like she didn't know. You tell me, I said, sliding it toward her. Found it online. Mom's dress too. Dad's medals. You've been busy. Her face didn't change at first. She just stood there, calculating. Then she shrugged, casual as anything. We need to move forward, Marcus, she said. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. I stood up, slow, feeling this cold rage settle in. You went into their home, I said, stepping closer. You took their things, their memories, and you're selling them like trash. For what? Pocket change. She didn't back down. It's not trash if someone's buying, she said, crossing her arms. And yeah, we could use the money. You're tying everything up with this lawsuit nonsense. I laughed, sharp and loud, and she flinched. Nonsense? I said. You destroyed their house, Clarissa. You displaced them. And now you're picking through the ashes like a vulture. You think that's moving forward? She opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes narrowing. You're making this bigger than it is, she said finally. It's just stuff. It's their life, I shot back. And you don't get to decide what it's worth. I grabbed the letter, held it up. This? My granddad wrote it to my grandma when he was overseas. You slapped a price tag on it. You're not just greedy, you're cruel. She didn't say anything, just turned and walked upstairs. I let her go, my heart pounding. The next day, Evelyn called. Got your pics, she said. Theft, conversion of property, we're adding it to the suit. She's digging her own grave. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Good, I said. Keep pushing. I hung up and sat there, staring at the boxes in the garage. Clarissa didn't just want the estate. She wanted every piece of my family she could sell off. I started packing the stuff she hadn't listed yet, moving it to Peter's for safekeeping. Every item felt heavy, like it carried my parents' voices with it. She'd crossed a line I didn't think anyone could cross, and there was no going back. I wasn't just fighting for the house anymore. I was fighting for them, for what she'd tried to erase. And I wasn't going to stop until she paid for every single thing she'd taken. I'm Marcus Holloway, and I've always been the kind of guy who tries to hold things together, my business, my family, my life. But when Clarissa tore down my parents' house and started selling their belongings, I realized some things can't be fixed. They just break, and you've got to decide what comes next. After finding those online listings, my mom's wedding dress, my dad's medals, I was done pretending we could salvage anything. The lawsuit was rolling, Evelyn piling on charges like bricks, and I was ready to see it through. But it wasn't just about the law anymore. It was personal, and Clarissa was about to find out what that meant. A few days after our blowout in the kitchen, word started spreading. The local paper picked up the story, small town, big drama, when the county preservation folks got involved. Unauthorized demolition sparks outrage, the headline said, and suddenly Clarissa's name was everywhere. Her social media, usually full of polished selfies and design tips, got swarmed. People I didn't even know were commenting. How could you? What kind of person does that? I saw it all from my phone, sitting in the living room, and felt this strange mix of satisfaction and disgust. She'd made her bed, and now she was lying in it. Her job took a hit next. She worked for this fancy interior design firm, high-end clients, big projects, and I guess they didn't like the heat. Peter texted me one morning. Heard from a buddy she's on leave. Indefinite. I wasn't surprised. Who'd hire someone to decorate their house after they'd bulldozed someone else's? Then the contractors she'd hired caved. Evelyn called me, her voice buzzing with energy. They're talking, she said. Both of them got picked up on another job, same shady stuff. They admitted Clarissa set it all up. No permits, cash under the table. They've got text from her, Marcus. It's solid. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. She's done, I said. Pretty much, Evelyn replied. This ties her hands. She can't wiggle out. That night, Clarissa came home. First time in days she'd stayed longer than 5 minutes. She looked rough, hair messy, eyes red like she hadn't slept. She dropped her bag by the door and stared at me, sitting there with a glass of water. You need to stop this, she said, her voice shaky. The lawsuit, the stories, it's ruining us. I set the glass down, slow and deliberate. Us, I said. There's no us anymore, Clarissa. You ruined yourself. She stepped closer, hands clenched. Think of our future, she said. We can still fix this. Drop the case. I'll figure out the house stuff. I stood up, looking down at her. You demolished my parents' home, I said, each word cold and clear. You sold their things. You don't get to beg for a future now. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel sorry. She'd played her game, and she'd lost. You're killing me, she whispered. No, I said. You did that on your own. She grabbed her bag and left, the door slamming behind her. I didn't move, just stood there, letting the quiet settle in. The next day, I took control. I called the bank, froze our joint accounts. She wasn't getting a dime more from me. I pulled her name off everything, credit cards, utilities, anything tied to her life. Then I met with Evelyn and signed divorce papers. You sure? She asked, pen in hand. Never been sure, I said. She nodded, filed them that afternoon. Clarissa was served again, lawsuit and divorce, back to back. I didn't hear from her for a while after that, but the fallout kept coming. The media dug deeper, neighbors talking, preservation officials weighing in. Her firm cut ties completely. No leave about it. I saw her car gone from the driveway one morning, and Peter told me she'd been spotted at her sister's place across the country. Running, probably. I didn't care where she went. I kept moving forward, checked on my parents, worked my business, let Evelyn do her thing. The house was gone, but the land was still there, tied up in county hands now. My parents were safe at Peter's, and I started thinking about what came next for them. Every night, I'd sit in our house, my house now, and feel this weight lifting. Not all at once, but slow, like I was shedding her piece by piece. I'd look at the empty spots where her stuff used to be, her shoes by the door, her coat on the rack, and it didn't hurt. It felt right. She tried to take everything, my family, my legacy, and she'd ended up with nothing. The lawsuit was still building, the divorce ticking along, but I knew I'd come out on top. Not because I wanted to win, but because she'd lost all on her own. I'd given her 15 years, built a life she could have shared, and she'd thrown it away for a pile of rubble and some quick cash. I wasn't broken. I was free. And that was something she'd never take from me. I'm Marcus Holloway, and I've always believed in fighting for what matters, even when it's hard. By the time Clarissa's mess landed us in court, I was ready to see it through, not just for me, but for my parents, for the life she'd tried to rip apart. The lawsuit had been building for weeks, Evelyn stacking evidence like a fortress. The trust papers, county zoning laws, contractor confessions, even screenshots of Clarissa selling my mom's wedding dress online. It was airtight, and I knew it. But standing in that courtroom, watching it all unfold, still felt like walking through a storm I hadn't seen coming. The day started early. I drove to the courthouse, a gray building with too many steps, and met Evelyn outside. She was in a sharp suit, her briefcase slung over her shoulder, looking like she'd been born for this. We've got this, she said, clapping me on the arm. She doesn't have a leg to stand on. I nodded, my stomach tight, and followed her in. My parents were there too, Nolan and Marjorie, sitting in the front row, holding hands. Mom gave me a small smile, and Dad just nodded, his face set like stone. They didn't want to be here, but they needed to be. We all did. Clarissa walked in a few minutes later, alone, no lawyer beside her. She'd hired some guy at the last minute, a nervous-looking kid in a cheap suit who kept shuffling papers like he was drowning. She didn't look at me, just sat there, chin up, like she could bluff her way through this. The judge, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, called the room to order, and it began. Evelyn went first, laying it out step by step. She showed the trust, proving the house was my parents' property, not mine or Clarissa's. She pulled up the historical zoning docs, highlighting every rule Clarissa broke by demolishing it without permits. She played the contractor's recorded statement, his shaky voice admitting Clarissa paid him cash, told him to just get it done. Then came the heavy stuff, photos of the rubble, my parents' testimony about being forced out, the online listings with mom's dress and dad's medal circled in red. Evelyn's voice was steady, cutting as she said, "This wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. Mrs. Holloway acted with intent, and she caused irreparable harm." I watched the judge's face, saw her lips tighten when Evelyn showed the elder abuse claim, my parents, in their 70s, displaced with no warning. Clarissa's lawyer stood up next, fumbling through his notes. He tried to spin it, said she'd misunderstood the ownership, thought she was simplifying our finances as a good wife. He even called it a family decision gone wrong, like I'd been in on it. I almost laughed, but I kept my face still. The judge didn't buy it either. She cut him off mid-sentence, asking, "Where's the proof of this misunderstanding? Permits? Discussions?" He stammered, sat down fast. Then Clarissa took the stand. She looked smaller up there, her voice soft, playing the victim. "I just wanted us to move forward," she said, eyes darting to the judge. Marcus was so tied to that old house, I thought I was helping. Evelyn didn't let that slide. She stood up, calm but lethal. "Helping by selling his mother's wedding dress? His father's wore medals? You hired illegal contractors, Mrs. Holloway. You broke laws. How's that help?" Clarissa flinched, mumbled something about needing money, but it fell flat. The evidence didn't lie: screenshots, footage from neighbors' security cameras showing her directing the demolition, even the app where she'd found the workers. My parents spoke next. Mom's voice shook as she described waking up to the noise, grabbing what she could. Dad kept it short, said she didn't ask. She just did it. The judge listened, her pen scratching notes. When it was over, she didn't take long. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, her tone like steel, "you acted without authority, violated property rights, and caused significant distress. The evidence is overwhelming." She ruled in our favor: full restitution for the demolition, compensation for every stolen item Clarissa couldn't return, plus damages for emotional harm. Clarissa's assets were seized to cover it: her bank accounts, her car, whatever she had left. She sat there, pale, as the gavel came down. I looked at my parents, saw Mom wipe her eyes, Dad squeeze her hand. We'd won, but it didn't feel like a celebration, just relief, heavy and quiet. Outside, Evelyn grinned at me. "Told you," she said. "She's finished." I thanked her, watched her head off, then drove my parents back to Peter's. We didn't talk much, just sat in his living room, letting it sink in. Later, I heard Clarissa had bolted, packed a bag, and gone to her sister's across the country. Her reputation was shot, her job gone, her money tied up in the judgment. She'd lost everything she'd chased, and I didn't feel a shred of pity. That night, back at my house, I stood in the kitchen, the divorce papers still fresh from a week ago. She was out of my life, legally and otherwise. The courtroom had echoed what I'd known for months. She'd never been the woman I thought she was. I poured a glass of water, looked out at the dark yard, and felt something settle. Not peace yet, but close. The fight was over, and I was still standing. I'm Marcus Holloway, and I've always been the kind of guy who picks up the pieces after a mess, even when it's not mine to clean. After the courtroom win, with Clarissa ordered to pay for the demolition and the stolen memories she tried to sell, I felt like I could finally breathe again, not fully, but enough to start moving forward. The judge's ruling had hit her hard, stripping her down to nothing, and she'd run off to her sister's place across the country. I didn't care where she was anymore. She was gone from my life, and that was what mattered. But winning didn't erase the hole she'd left, not in me, but in my parents' world. Their house was rubble, their things scattered or sold, and I needed to make that right. The settlement money came through a few weeks later, cash from Clarissa's seized accounts, whatever she hadn't already blown. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to do something real. I sat down with my parents at Peter's place one evening, the three of us around his little dining table, cups of coffee steaming in front of us. "What do you want to do?" I asked, looking between them. Mom, Marjorie, fiddled with her mug, her gray hair catching the light. "We can't go back there," she said softly. "Not after all that." Dad, Nolan, nodded, his hands resting flat on the table. Too many ghosts now, he said. I got it. The land was still there, but the county had bought it back after the demolition mess, planning some kind of park. The house they'd loved was gone, and no amount of money could rebuild those exact memories. How about something new? I said, leaning forward. A place that's yours, somewhere peaceful. They looked at each other, then back at me, and I saw a flicker of hope in Mom's eyes. We started looking the next day, nothing big, just a cozy spot they could call home. After a few drives up the coast, we found it, a little house on a quiet bluff, overlooking the ocean. It had a wraparound porch, a small garden out back, and windows that let the light pour in. Mom walked through it, touching the walls like she could already see herself there, and Dad stood on the porch, breathing in the salt air. This'll do, he said, and that was that. I used the settlement cash to buy it outright. No mortgage, no strings, just theirs. Watching them settle in over the next few weeks felt like stitching up a wound. Mom planted roses again, Dad set up a workbench in the garage, and they started smiling more, real smiles, not the forced ones they'd worn at Peter's. I drive up on weekends, sit with them on that porch, and feel the weight of everything start to lift. Back at my own house, I was wiping Clarissa out too. The divorce was final, her name off every paper, every account. I boxed up what she'd left behind, clothes, a few books, and dropped them at a donation center. No point holding on to ghosts. One night, I sat down with my phone and typed out a message to her, not because I wanted her back, but because I needed to close the door. I won't ever hate you, I wrote, but I'll never forgive you. I hit send, blocked her number, and that was it. She didn't deserve more than that. The land where the estate used to be was changing too. The county turned it into a memorial park, Holloway Heritage Grove. They called it, after my family. They'd asked my permission, and I'd said yes, figuring it was better than letting it sit empty. They planted trees, put up a plaque about the history, and left the creek my dad and I used to fish in untouched. It wasn't the house, but it was something, a mark that said we'd been there, that she hadn't erased us completely. I drive by sometimes, just to look, and feel this quiet pride. Clarissa had tried to destroy it all, but she'd only cleared the way for something new. My life was shifting too. The house felt empty without her, but not in a bad way, more like a clean slate. I started having friends over again, guys from work or old buddies I hadn't seen much during the marriage. We'd grill out back, laugh over beers, and I'd realize how much I'd missed that. Peter came by once, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "You're looking lighter, man." He was right. I was. The business was steady, those Tokyo deals had paid off, and I had my parents close, safe, happy. Clarissa's shadow was fading, and I wasn't chasing it away anymore. It was just gone. One evening, I stood in my kitchen, washing dishes, and caught myself humming some old tune Mom used to sing. I stopped, smiled, and kept going. What was left behind wasn't ruin, it was family, roots she couldn't touch. The park, the new house, the laughter filling my days, it was all proof of that. She'd swung hard, but she'd missed what mattered. I dried my hands, looked out at the dark yard, and felt steady. Not perfect, but good. And that was enough for now. I'm Marcus Holloway, and I've always been the kind of guy who finds a way to keep going, no matter what gets thrown at me. After the dust settled, Clarissa gone, the lawsuit won, my parents in their new coastal home, I started feeling like I could stand tall again. It wasn't instant, like flipping a switch, but more like the slow thaw after a long winter. The courtroom had closed one chapter, and the months that followed built something new, something solid. By the time the county finished Holloway Heritage Grove, the park they'd made from the old estate land, I was ready to see it, not just as a bystander, but as part of it. The opening day came on a crisp spring morning, the kind where the air smells fresh and the sun warms your shoulders. I drove my parents down, the three of us quiet in the car, not needing to fill the space with words. Mom, Marjorie, sat up front, her hands folded in her lap, and Dad, Nolan, leaned back in the seat behind, staring out the window. When we got there, the place looked different, open, green, alive. Trees lined the paths, young ones with thin trunks, and the creek still ran through, gurgling like it always had. A small crowd was there, county folks, a few neighbors, some kids running around, and a wooden sign stood at the entrance, Holloway Heritage Grove, dedicated to a family's legacy. I read it, felt my throat tighten, and looked at my parents. Mom's eyes were shiny, but she smiled, and Dad just nodded, like it was right. We walked in together, my boots crunching on the gravel path. The county guy in charge, a short man with glasses, gave a quick speech, something about history, preservation, turning loss into growth. I didn't catch all the words. I was too busy watching my parents. Mom stopped by a bench near the creek, ran her hand over it, and said, "This is nice, Marcus." Dad stood beside her, hands in his pockets, and added, "Better than I thought it'd be." That was high praise from him. We stayed a while, wandering the paths, letting the kids' laughter and the breeze wash over us. I could still picture the house, the porch where I'd sit with Dad, the kitchen where Mom baked, but this felt okay too. Not the same, but good in its own way. Clarissa had tried to erase it all, and instead, she'd left us with this, a place that'd outlast her mistake. Driving back, Mom turned to me and said, "You did right by us, son." I kept my eyes on the road, nodded, and said, "Had to." That was it. No big talk, just truth. Back at my place, life was settling into something I liked. The house was mine now, no traces of her left. I'd painted the walls, moved the furniture around, made it feel new. Friends came over more. Peter, some guys from work, and we'd sit out back, grilling or just talking. One night, someone asked, "What happened to Clarissa, anyway?" I took a sip of my beer, smiled a little, and said, "She confused legacy with currency." They laughed, and we moved on. It was the simplest way I could put it. She'd chased money and lost everything that mattered. I didn't wonder about her much. She was out there somewhere, probably still with her sister, licking her wounds. The lawsuit had taken what she had. The divorce cut her loose, and I didn't need to know more. My world was here, my parents up the coast, my business humming along, my home full of noise again. Weekends, I'd head to their place, sit on that porch with the ocean stretching out below. Mom would bring out tea, Dad would tinker in the garage, and we'd talk about nothing important, weather, fishing, what to plant next. It was peace, the kind you don't notice until it's been gone a while. One afternoon, I stood by the creek in the grove, alone this time. The water was clear, running over rocks like it had when I was a kid. I thought about Clarissa, not with anger, just a dull ache that faded fast. She'd swung hard, thinking she'd take it all, the house, the money, me, and she'd ended up empty-handed. I didn't hate her. I didn't need to. She'd lost enough. Me? I had my parents, their new home, this park with our name on it. I had people who stuck by me, a life I'd rebuilt from her ashes. I tossed a pebble into the creek, watched the ripples spread, and felt steady. Back home that night, I cooked dinner, steak, simple, the way Dad liked it, and ate alone at the table. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. I thought about the past year, the fights, the demolition, the courtroom, and it felt far off, like a story I'd heard once. What stayed close was the laughter from last weekend's barbecue, Mom's voice on the phone, Dad's gruff, "Good job," when I fixed his porch step. That was my aftermath, not ruin, but roots. Clarissa had confused legacy with currency, and I'd chosen the real thing. Standing at the sink, washing dishes, I looked out at the dark yard and felt one thing clear as day: peace. It wasn't loud or showy, just there, solid as the ground under my feet. And that was all I needed.